They found it in the damp hollow beneath the floorboards of what had once been the plantation's main kitchen. A silver locket, blackened with soot, its face etched faintly with a woman's initials. Me. Inside, there was no miniature portrait, no lock of hair, only a scrap of parchment folded 12 times over. The ink had long faded, but under lamplight and patience, the words revealed themselves like a whisper from grave soil. I did not mean to love them all. An archivist named Thomas Granger, cataloging the ruins in the 1930s, swore that when he first opened that locket, the scent of magnolia, thick and sickly sweet, rose from it as though time itself had perfumed the air. He described it as a perfume for repentance, and though he never admitted fear, his hands, he said, shook like a man at confession. That fragment sparked a century-old debate among local historians of Iberville Parish, Louisiana, resurrecting a legend that had been whispered over campfires and quilting circles since before the Civil War. The tale of a bondswoman named Mercy Elkins, said to have seduced nearly every man on Meriton Plantation before marrying its widowed owner, the planter's patriarch, Silas Meriton. Within a year of that marriage, almost all the other men who once claimed her favor were dead, by fever, by accident, by apparent madness. Their bodies, when found, bore an identical mark over the heart, a bruise dark as wine, shaped like the print of a woman's hand. The plantation house stands mostly bones now, columns split like ribs, the veranda strangled by kudzu, but its story survives because death there did not rest quietly. Generations of locals claim to hear a woman singing in the cane fields when the wind changed, her melody half hymn, half plea. And down in the parish archives, tucked between bills of sale and baptism records, there remain notes in Silas Meriton's handwriting that propose something not of lust, but of deliberate manipulation, of a mind so observant, patient, and precise that entire fortunes tilted under its grasp. Before we continue with the story of Mercy Elkins and the deaths that marked her ascent from the quarters to the Master's house, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. The year was 1847, a time when Louisiana glimmered with a deceptive splendor. The riverboats steamed up and down the Mississippi, their decks crowded with cotton bales, caged songbirds, and men bragging about sugar prices that hung like omens over every acre of soil. New Orleans itself was a carnival of perfume and rot, the humidity cloaking its streets in a kind of fever dream. But upriver, on the vast estates hemmed by cypress and sawgrass, the world moved slower, heavier, bound by tradition and terror alike. Meriton Plantation lay 30 miles west of Baton Rouge, on land first granted to Colonel Aldous Meriton after the War of 1812. Its fields yielded cane as tall as a man and as sharp as razors when you brushed the blades. The big house, 2 stories high with a balcony running all around like a crown, was painted a brilliant white that blinded travelers at noon. From a distance, it looked perfect. Up close, one could smell the truth, a mix of sweat, molasses, and something faintly metallic that no soap could quite erase. Inside that world, hierarchy was law. Whites of the planter class ruled with polished cruelty. Poor whites survived on debt and pride, and enslaved people, human property by the nation's statute, labored from dusk till exhaustion while the world called it prosperity. There was a Sunday chapel for the enslaved, a wooden structure by the riverbank where sermons preached submission from the pulpit, while the wind carried off the names of those sold downriver. But rumor said that in those same fields, after dark, other gatherings occurred, ones not sanctioned by the Master, where prayers were spoken to older spirits before the cross replaced them. These whispers frightened the overseers, who heard drumming where none should be, saw candles burning deep in the cane, and returned with stories that dissolved into nervous laughter at breakfast. It was easier to pretend the night was silent. Among the enslaved at Meriton in those days was a young woman not born there. Records list her arrival in 1843, purchased from the estate of a bankrupt planter in Natchez. Her name, Mercy. Age estimated 19, seamstress, of mixed complexion. Yet accounts vary. Some said her hair carried the sheen of copper, others that her eyes looked black until lamplight turned them gold. In a world where the enslaved were often reduced to numbers, Mercy drew notice, because she seemed to notice everything first. By contemporary accounts, she learned the habits of those around her with unnatural accuracy. She remembered each person's appetite, the rhythm of their walk, the music they hummed when they thought no one listened. Kitchen women said she could predict the moods of the master from the way his dogs barked before dawn. Field hands swore she knew the weather better than the overseer's barometer. When she smiled, they said, it was never out of joy, but as though she had already seen the next hour and found it amusing. What no one could deny was that men noticed her. Among the cabins, that was danger embodied, because attention from a white man was as likely to kill as to elevate. Yet she did not wither under it. Her poise, her speech, careful, soft, deliberate, seemed designed to mirror the listener's desire. Scholars later called it manipulation, but those who knew the time understood it as survival, honed into an art form. The antebellum South, for all its outward composure, trembled beneath its own contradictions. The railroads crept westward, the telegraph wires hummed, abolitionists printed pamphlets like scripture, and still the plantations pressed on as though untouched by the century's tide. In Louisiana's parishes, Catholic bells mingled with Protestant hymns and voodoo chants. One could pass from sermon to seance between sunup and sundown. Death, disease, and desire all wore the same polite mask. The Meriton family embodied that decay behind refinement. Silas Meriton, the widower at the center of this story, was a man born of immense means and little imagination. His first wife, Eleanor, died of fever 3 summers before Mercy's arrival. He was said to have loved her fiercely, though no one could recall hearing him speak to her with tenderness. Grief turned him inward, and the plantation, his inheritance and his burden, became his obsession. Silas's surviving letters reveal a mind increasingly troubled by loss and isolation. To one associate in New Orleans, he wrote, I feel the weight of invisible company, as though memory itself has claws. It was in that household, hallowed by mourning, that Mercy found her stage. The winter of 1846 was bitter along the river. Frost formed on shutters never meant for cold, and the cane knives lay unused for a month. That was when Mercy began working inside the main house, according to payroll ledgers and household inventories. She had petitioned the steward to be reassigned from the fields, saying her fingers were better with cloth than cane. The steward, a superstitious man named Josiah Crim, later told a visiting priest, there was something in her voice made a refusal feel like blasphemy. Within weeks, Mercy was sewing for the household staff, repairing the linens Eleanor Meriton had once ordered from Charleston. Visitors to the house reportedly remarked on the new maid with manners fit for the parlor. To them, she was a curiosity. To others, a danger not yet realized. Beyond the gates, the nation simmered toward conflict. Texas had been annexed 2 years prior, and talk of expansion, the destiny of white landholders to move west, fed new wars and new greed. But in the parishes, such grand subjects meant little. Life revolved around weather, yield, and whispered reckoning. The enslaved population outnumbered the white. Fear governed both sides. The masters feared revolt. The enslaved feared punishment beyond imagination. In that delicate balance, even affection became an act shadowed by peril. The church taught order. The law enshrined ownership. Yet something older than either seemed to pulse beneath that soil, something in the water, in the relentless hum of cicadas after sundown, a force neither wholly Christian nor altogether human. Travelers spoke of dreams that followed them for days after spending a night near the Meriton grounds. Dreams of music rising from empty fields, of a woman's silhouette at the window just before stormlight. The census of 1850, 2 years after the Locket's date, lists Meriton Plantation thriving. 184 enslaved persons, 1,200 acres in cane, 62 in corn. The household had expanded again, with Mercy recorded not merely as handmaid but as domestic. A curious word, since domestic implied proximity, the kind that blurred boundaries. Letters from neighboring planters began to mention that woman in white silks, seen walking beside Silas on Sunday afternoons. To the outside world, it appeared an indulgent eccentricity. To those within the plantation walls, it signaled something seismic, a master's widow reimagined in the body of his servant. By the time the main parlor was repainted and silver polished for a wedding feast in the spring of 1851, the quarters rang with a mixture of disbelief and dread. The law forbade their marriage, yet records indicate some form of private ceremony took place, perhaps a baptismal vow misused, or a blessing coerced from a traveling preacher with debts to settle. Whatever its nature, from that night forward, Mercy Elkins Meriton held the keys not only to the household, but, many believed, to the master's very will. Those who disapproved learned quickly to silence it. One overseer, dismissed for drunken insolence, was found 2 months later in the river, throat torn open, though the nearest witness claimed no boat had passed that day. Silas called it an accident of fate, but rumors spread that Mercy had been seen the evening prior, down by the landing, her skirts unsoiled, yet her hands streaked with something dark. Old parish records are mute on such affairs. They record harvest yields, not hauntings. But diaries and family letters tell another story, one written in the margins. A wealthy widow from Baton Rouge recounted that during a dinner at Meriton House she felt a charm upon the air when Mercy spoke, yet left with a splitting headache and the unshakable sense that her dead husband's voice had called her name in the night. Later, folklore made Mercy into a witch, a temptress, a demon given flesh to punish the wickedness of slavery. But the earliest documents reveal her as a woman navigating an impossible geography, a labyrinth of cruelty and power where the only safe move might have been the most perilous. Whether one calls that survival or manipulation depends on how one sees the line between desperation and design. And yet, the deaths that began soon after could not be explained by sympathy or society. They came one after another like falling dominoes. A field hand dead of sudden madness, an overseer who drowned in shallow water, 2 young planters' sons vanished after visiting. In each case, the last person reported speaking with them was the same woman, the one whose initials gleamed, decades later, inside a tarnished locket hidden beneath the floorboards. The relic remains on display in the parish museum today, its inscription barely visible under glass, the scent of magnolia long since gone. What has not faded is the question it carries. Was Mercy Elkins a woman driven to commandeer her own fate through cunning and persuasion, or was she something else entirely, shaped by forces that predated her and used men's desires as instruments of judgment? Whichever truth you believe, the deaths continued until the plantation itself seemed to rot from within, leaving behind only whispers, a handful of pages, and that single line of confession folded in a Locket's heart. If history remembers Mercy Elkins as a spectral idea, the manipulative beauty whose silence compelled men to ruin, it hardly remembers the people orbiting her, each caught in that household's peculiar gravity. Yet their voices, faint as they are, survive in margins of ledgers, in letters never mailed, in gossip recorded decades later by parish chroniclers. To understand the calamity that followed, one must first walk among those whose lives touched hers. 3 figures who, in different ways, felt both drawn to and undone by her. Silas Meriton, the widower master, Josiah Crim, the overseer who first brought her to the house, and Louvenia, the kitchen matron who saw what none else would believe. Silas Meriton was 47 when Mercy arrived at the big house, though grief had aged him beyond that count. His portrait, painted in 1842, the year before his wife's death, shows a man of unremarkable breeding. Thin lips, a pair of sharp blue eyes that never quite align, hair combed and oiled like a merchant's rather than a planter's. The locals called him Captain, though he had never fought. Titles clung to wealth the way the humidity clung to flesh. He walked with a stick carved from mahogany, tapping floorboards with a rhythm that unnerved his servants. "I hear the house breathe," he was known to say, and it was not always clear if he spoke metaphorically. His nights, after Eleanor's passing, fell into a ritual of decay, pipe smoke hanging low as ghosts while he leafed through her journal and drank Madeira until the pages blurred into prayer. The household learned to leave him untouched in those hours. The first testimony about his demeanor comes from Josiah Crim, who wrote in his steady, half-educated hand, "The master sees too much through what he's lost. The quarters walk on nails the size of Mercy." One heavy August morning, Silas summoned Josiah to the veranda. The overseer later recalled to a visiting surveyor how the air thickened like syrup before any talk began. "How many hands new from Natchez?" Silas asked, eyes on the horizon. "5, sir. 4 field, 1 house." "The woman, the seamstress. Mercy, you said?" "Yes, sir." "Can she read?" A pause. "She marks letters, sir. Enough to name things." Silas tapped the cane twice. "Bring her to the house tomorrow. The drawing-room curtain is torn. Let her mend it. I'll observe her work." To outsiders, such an appointment seemed trivial, but for someone born into bondage, it was as consequential as a coronation. It meant entry into the world of whispered privilege, of soft floors and proximate power. Within Silas's interior world, the line between observation and obsession soon blurred. Servants later recounted how he began taking his breakfast downstairs, earlier than had been his habit, so as to see the seamstress at her frame. He would speak less, watch longer. In the stillness of that great house, every stitch she drew through fabric seemed a heartbeat. 2 weeks later, Lavinia, the kitchen matron, overheard the first true conversation between them. Silas stood at the parlor threshold watching Mercy adjust a folded drape. "You've been taught well," he said. "Who taught you?" "My mother, sir," Mercy answered without turning, her voice even. "And where is she now?" "Where the river ends," Mercy said simply. He studied her a moment longer, uncertain whether the words meant burial or something more mystical. Silas, though educated in commerce, was untrained in subtle speech. He took comfort in ledgers, not riddles. Yet from that day forward he began asking for small things, minor mending, repairs, tokens that kept her presence near. So gradual was his surrender that even Josiah, attentive to every change in his master's demeanor, failed to see the moment affection slipped into enthrallment. In the Merchants' Club at Baton Rouge that winter, another planter remarked on Silas's transformation, "He looks cured of his sorrow, but crazed all the same. There's light behind his eyes now, only it burns wrong." Silas's servants noticed, too, that the shutters of Eleanor's private chamber, locked since her death, were opened again. Candles burned there nightly, though no one was permitted entrance. Some said he held seances, longing to speak with his departed wife. Others whispered he required Mercy to read Eleanor's old journals aloud while he listened in silence, eyes closed, as if measuring one woman's soul through the voice of another. Josiah Crim, meanwhile, had spent half his life enforcing an order he neither designed nor fully believed in. Born poor in Kentucky, he came south for work when his own prospects collapsed after the Panic of 1837. An overseer's job was brutal mathematics, How many lashes equaled 1 hour lost? How much yield cost 1 life? Josiah learned not to count what conscience couldn't pay back. But around the winter of Mercy's arrival at the big house, something in him began to slip. His journal, fragments now preserved in a private collection, reads like a mind unspooling. Mornings feel longer. The fields hum at dawn. For every man's foot upon the soil, I think there's another print beneath it. He was not a man easily frightened. Yet, after the second frost, the dogs began refusing to patrol near the quarters after midnight. Once, finding blood on the hound's muzzle, he followed its trail to the riverbank, where only ripples marked something heavy dragged into water. He reported this to the master. Silas merely nodded. "The river keeps its own math," he replied. "We owe it nothing." Josiah kept silent, but he began watching Mercy more keenly. He noticed how her presence dulled arguments between quarrelsome men, how overseers who ought to despise her instead spoke with unguarded familiarity. Once, in the washing yard, he overheard 2 men dispute her motives. "You think she loves the master?" one asked. The other laughed softly. "She loves what he can't see. That's more dangerous." Josiah described her later. Her hands small, like a girl's, Neil's, but she holds them still, as if the air around them belongs to her alone. She don't raise her eyes quick. She lets you wait for the look, makes a man measure himself. He told Lavinia, "That woman's playing a tune none of us learned." Lavinia only crossed herself, murmuring, "Some song's been older than sin, Josiah." What bent Josiah's loyalty was not simply superstition. It was fear he couldn't name. A fear that mercy itself, that divine virtue he'd heard praised in church, had taken flesh and turned vindictive. Lavinia, the matron of the kitchen, had held her post longer than any living servant there. Thick-waisted, with eyes pale as oysters, she'd once breastfed both white and black children on that plantation, though she would speak of it only in riddles. Her domain was heat, hunger, and silence, broken only by the clatter of pots and the chant of recipes learned without letters. To her, the house was a living body. "Walls eat words," she often said. "Feed them right or they spit you out." So when Mercy's whisper began circulating among the men, Lavinia kept count not of names but of the new quiet that followed each. She was fond of telling stories on Sunday evenings when the chores were finished. One night, as the younger women gathered to shell peas by lantern light, Mercy sat among them, though she seldom joined company. Lavinia began a tale about a girl who tempted the sea spirit with her singing. "She thought she had the charm," Lavinia said, "but salt water don't love, only borrows. You give yourself once and the tide keep pulling parts of you till you're gone." Mercy smiled faintly. "Maybe the sea was lonely," she said. Her voice carried no mockery, only calm inquiry, but it hushed the laughter. Lavinia stopped stirring her pot. "And what you reckon it want, child?" Mercy felt the heat from the hearth, that sweet rot of molasses in the air. "To see its face again," she said. After that night, Lavinia began leaving a bundle of herbs, rosemary, sage, a clove of garlic, beneath Mercy's bed mat, whispering prayers older than Scripture. "Not all eyes from this world," she muttered to Josiah when he questioned it. "That gal's being watched by something that remembers before baptism." Through Lavinia's recollection, later gathered from descendants, we glimpse the undercurrent of belief corralling fear into ritual. The enslaved had little trust in the church of their masters. Theirs was an older theology of balance, give and take, offering and reprieve. To them, Mercy's rise from quarters to mistress rank upset more than social order. It disrupted spiritual equilibrium. Power, in their worldview, always demanded payment. One by one, in the months following her union with Silas, the men of the house began showing signs of deterioration, what physicians might now call psychosomatic, but in that time the people called curses. Their minds frayed. Their tempers turned like meat in summer, and through each episode, Lavinia watched Mercy's expression for evidence of guilt, finding none. "Don't you feel burden?" Lavinia dared once to ask her. All lamps were doused except for the one between them. Mercy paused over the stitching in her lap. "Burden for what?" "For the way the air thickens after your name spoke." Mercy looked up then, and Lavinia swore years later those eyes changed, the irises deepening to bronze, as if lit from behind by some unseen furnace. "The air remembers what men forget," Mercy said quietly. "I only breathe what's already there." Lavinia dared not speak further. In the local chapel 2 miles downriver, Father André Leblanc, a plump Acadian priest with fingers perpetually ink-stained from his labors, had begun hearing troubling confessions from the Meriton estate. One young worker claimed he saw a woman walk the fields at night shining like a lantern. Another said his name was called from the woods by a voice identical to his dead sister's. The priest dismissed these as fatigue until Silas himself appeared one rainy afternoon, hat dripping, eyes rimmed red. "Father," he said, "I require guidance." LeBlanc gestured him to kneel, but Silas remained standing. "I have taken a wife, though not as the church prescribes." The priest's hand froze mid-gesture. "Then it is sin, my son, and must be renounced." Silas shook his head. "You speak of sin as if choice remained. She completes what I cannot bury." "Who completes it?" Silas only murmured the name, barely audible above the thunder. "Mercy." Later, LeBlanc recorded in his logbook, "The man believes his union sanctified by forces unseen. I sense in him not lust, but devotion twisted upon itself." When news of the plantation deaths began circulating, LeBlanc's memory of that conversation would haunt him, the look of peace mingled with ruin in Silas's face. By 1852, the household had become a study in disquiet. Lavinia's hands trembled when preparing meals. Josiah lingered near the edge of fields, afraid of shadows. Silas prowled the upper hallway as though searching for a doorway between worlds. And Mercy, her posture calm, voice serene, moved through it all like a dream given physical form. Visitors noticed the chill among servants, yet all remained outwardly respectable. The diaries of a Baton Rouge debutante, invited there for supper, describe Mercy thus. She spoke little, but when she did, even the air paused. The men sat like she'd set a spell of courtesy on them. I felt politely strangled. In one of Silas's later letters, he wrote, "Her silence instructs more than my tutors ever could. When she looks upon the land, it grows still, as though even the cane listens." Whatever Mercy's intent, her power became undeniable. Whether born of intellect, charm, or something darker, it spread. Men quarreled to please her. Women prayed for distance. And Luvenia's muttered prophecy that every gift requires its due was about to prove itself with merciless precision. Each of these lives, Silas's obsession, Josiah's disturbed faith, Lavinia's wary devotion, formed the human stage for the horror yet to unfurl. They circled Mercy Elkins like moths about a steady flame, unaware of how thin the air had grown, how close their wings drifted to the heat beneath her calm. By autumn of 1852, Meriton Plantation throbbed with a strange silence, the kind that falls before a hurricane when even insects seem to hold their breath. The cane stood ripe, heads drooping, ready to cut, but the workers whispered that the stalks bled when cleaved, that sweet juice oozed dark as rust. When one man tried to prove them wrong, swinging his blade at noon sharp, the wind carried back a sound that was not quite human, a low hum stretching into a cry, and he dropped the knife mid-stroke, swearing he'd heard a woman's laughter in the field. That night he fled toward the bayou, shouting Mercy's name to the trees. They found him by dawn on the levee mud, drowned in water barely deep enough to wet his ankles. His body bore no wounds except the same oddly shaped bruise, 5 faint prints over the heart. The parish physician, Dr. Whitfield, came from Baton Rouge to inspect the corpse, a stout Englishman who carried the confidence of science like a shield. He declared it a case of sudden palsy, meaning his heart simply stopped. But Lavinia muttered otherwise. "A heart don't quit till it's convinced," she said. "Somebody persuaded it." Dr. Whitfield's examination took place on the back veranda of the big house. The sky was the color of pewter, a storm building upriver. As Josiah and 2 field hands laid the body on a table, Mercy appeared without summons, her step noiseless, a white shawl drawn tight over her hair. "You shouldn't be here," Josiah told her, her gaze fixed on the dead man as if studying a mirror. "He called," she said. Silas stood behind her, face unreadable. "Let the woman observe," he said. Whitfield frowned. "Observe what, precisely?" "Whatever she wishes," Silas snapped. Then, turning to Mercy, his voice softened. "Do you recognize him?" Her fingers brushed the dead man's forehead, gently, reverently. "He was kind once," she said, "but kindness spoils easy in this place." The doctor cleared his throat. "Heart failure, plain and simple. Heat, overexertion. I find nothing mysterious." "Maybe you weren't looking for mystery," Mercy murmured. The words were so quiet one might have thought them imagined, yet every person on that porch shivered as though the wind had passed through their bones. When the storm broke, lightning split the nearest cypress, showering the veranda with resin. It smelled sweet, like sap and rain, and beneath it, faintly, that same magnolia perfume later trapped it in her locket. Afterward came smaller signs, shutters opening in rooms thought locked, candles guttering through windows were closed, the piano downstairs striking notes on its own at twilight. Josiah blamed drafts, rats, the servants' nerves. But more unsettling were Silas's habits. He ceased attending services, stopped eating meat, and sat for hours by the parlor fire speaking to no one. Lavinia tried to restore normalcy with ritual. She salted door frames, buried charms under thresholds, burned sage until the air swirled with bitter smoke. But nothing soothed the house. Even the dogs ceased barking, preferring to whimper and scratch at the servants' doors as if begging sanctuary. "Master's cursed himself," Josiah said one evening, half to Lavinia, half to the bottle beside him. "Ain't right for a man to love what the law forbids." "It ain't law he feared breaking," Lavinia replied. "It's promise. He promised that first wife he'd meet her in heaven clean, and now—" She spat in the dirt. "He married different spirits altogether." Mercy moved through the house while those whispers thickened around her, untouched by scorn or sympathy. When servants crossed themselves, she smiled politely. When asked about the noises, she said, "Old Timber remembers." Her calm only deepened suspicion. Around October, Father André LeBlanc returned to the plantation at Silas's urgent written request. The letter simply read, "There are voices in my home that answer prayers I did not speak." The priest arrived at dusk, lantern swinging. Mercy greeted him on the veranda, not Silas. "He is resting," she said. "I will wait." Her eyes softened. "He doesn't sleep, Father. He listens." LeBlanc hesitated. "Listens for what?" She tilted her head, faintly smiling. "The buried." Something in the tone, a mixture of pity and amusement, unsettled him. He followed her inside, the air close as fever. Silas sat by the fireplace, staring at invisible company. When LeBlanc sprinkled holy water near the hearth, the droplets sizzled upon touching the mantel's stone, though no heat came off it. "Do you hear anything now?" the priest asked. Silas whispered, "Only breathing, large as the room." LeBlanc felt a chill coil up his spine. "You must leave this house for a time. Come stay at the rectory. Bring your wife." "She cannot step off these grounds," Silas said, shaking his head. She said the land claimed her, or... He hesitated. She claimed the land. I forget which. Mercy watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable, like marble warmed by candlelight. When the priest approached her with a crucifix, she didn't recoil. She simply reached out and traced along its silver edge. Cold, she noted, as if surprised. LeBlanc returned to Baton Rouge that night unable to pray. In his travel journal he confessed, "The evil there, if evil it be, hides in serenity. She blasphemes through calm." The overseers began quitting soon after. The first claimed he dreamed of being buried alive, his throat filled with sugar rather than earth. The second awoke blind for 3 days, though physicians found no cause. By winter, only Josiah remained, his faith cracking like ice. On Christmas Eve, Silas hosted a supper meant to prove all well. A half-dozen neighboring planters attended, uneasy but curious. The table gleamed with crystal. The candles burned without flicker. Mercy sat at the head beside her husband, dressed in cream silk, her neck encircled by a thread of black pearls. Toasts were made, laughter forced. Yet one guest later testified he felt an invisible weight pressing onto his son and his chest throughout the meal. When dessert was served, a custard sweetened by Mercy's own recipe, 2 of the men excused themselves moments apart and were found outside, retching into the azalea hedge. "Bad cream," Mercy said gently. Her tone suggested concern, but her smile never reached her eyes. Within a fortnight, both men were dead, one from fever, one from falling from his horse into a ravine. In both, coroners recorded the same mark above the heart. By then, New Orleans newspapers had begun to carry rumors under veiled language. Unfortunate events at a river estate. A gentleman's household plagued by maladies of unknown origin. None printed her name, but everyone in the parish already knew it. Visitors stopped coming. Silas shuttered the east wing completely. Mercy spent her days tending roses that somehow bloomed all winter, their scent drifting through the house, even when snow dusted the veranda rails. When Lavinia dared ask how she made flowers survive the cold, Mercy offered that faint smile again. "The ground keeps heat if you feed it enough," she said. Lavinia stared at the blossoming beds, the soil beneath darker than any she'd seen before. "Feed it what, child?" Mercy met her gaze lightly. "Memory," she said. "It's richer than manure." That night, Lavinia packed what few things she owned and left the plantation's quarters for good, walking barefoot toward the parish road. She did not look back. From that point on, Meriton House became a place locals passed quickly, hats lowered, prayers whispered, and those who dared glance at its windows after dusk swore they saw 2 silhouettes on the balcony, one standing, one kneeling, locked forever in conversation no living tongue could decipher. The rumors, the bruises, the laughter in the fields, they were preludes, like the tuning of a wicked instrument before the music truly began. Because after the new year of 1853, the deaths stopped for a time, but the living said they felt themselves watched, counted, prepared. The plantation, for all its wealth, had turned into a waiting room for something immense and unseen. By the spring of 1853, Iberville Parish had turned against the Meriton name. Families who once dined with Silas now crossed the road rather than pass his carriage. Preachers stopped shaking his hand after service. The sugar yields fell by 1/3, not from blight but from fear. Hands abandoned the fields, muttering that the soil refused to rest easy. They said the ground was listening. In the courthouse taverns of Baton Rouge, the whispers hardened into accusation. Some said Silas had poisoned his rivals. Others claimed Mercy brewed potions from herbs rooted in the graveyard's edge. Whatever the theory, each began the same way, with the bruise over the heart. Sheriff Abner Holt finally sent a deputy upriver to look things over. The report he filed dripped with nervous understatement. Property appears sound, save an odor impossible to define. Perhaps chemical, perhaps organic. The lady of the house is polite beyond reason. The master thin, distracted, all gestures sluggish as one lately ill. He concluded lamely, recommend no action until further evidence. But evidence was already gathering. Quiet, human, breathing evidence in the hearts of those still trapped inside the house. Josiah Crimm's nights had become an unbroken sermon of terror. He heard footsteps above his quarters, though no one occupied the floor. At dawn, every chicken lay dead. Throats uncut, yet eyes clouded white. He began sleeping with a Bible open on his chest, half comfort, half shield. One night a soft knock came. Mercy stood in the doorway, lamplight outlining her figure. "You should rest," she said. "I can't." His voice cracked. "The walls talk." "They always have." He set the Bible aside. "Tell me straight, what sort of thing been waked up here?" She considered him a moment, eyes calm as a predator's. "No thing, only truth. And truth has a terrible appetite." He rose, trembling. "Truth don't need blood, woman." Mercy looked almost tender. "Oh, Josiah, you think this is blood's doing? No, it's the cost of lying so long that honesty must come for rent." Before he could answer, the lamp went out, though its oil was fresh, plunging them into darkness thick enough to taste. When he relit it, she was gone. The next week, Josiah resigned by letter and fled north, where he entered the Methodist seminary at Memphis. In later years, he preached temperance against every vice but faith itself, and when pressed about those days, he would only whisper, "I seen mercy without forgiveness." With Josiah gone, Silas ran the estate himself, shuffling ledgers in a daze. Mercy rarely left his side by daylight, and by night she sang to herself, a low, ancient melody, neither hymn nor lullaby. Servants heard it echo down stairways and said the tune bent time, clocks lost minutes, and dreams stretched thin as taffy. In May, Father LeBlanc tried once more to intervene. He brought with him 2 fellow clerics and the authority of the diocese, intending to confront the pair and insist upon proper separation. The trio arrived mid-afternoon, collars gleaming against the heat, their courage buoyed by prayer. Silas received them courteously in the drawing room. Mercy poured sweet tea with perfect composure. "Mr. Meriton," the elder priest began, "your estate has drawn grave concern. Rumors, blasphemous rumors, abound. We come as friends to urge restoration of order." Silas smiled faintly. "Order, Father? You mistake this peace for chaos." LeBlanc stepped forward. "Peace? Your neighbors die groaning, your servants flee, and still that mark." He stopped when Mercy placed a teacup before him. "Drink," she said gently. "Warmth steadies the tongue." The priests exchanged uneasy glances. She seated herself opposite them, back straight, gaze unwavering. "You speak of sin," she said. "But sin is merely debt by another name. This land owes theirs. After all the prayers said over breaking bodies, what you call curse might simply be the collection due." LeBlanc's mouth went dry. "You blaspheme." Mercy inclined her head, neither denying nor confirming. "If truth offends heaven, perhaps heaven prefers lies." Her voice lulled, almost musical. One of the other priests, young and impressionable, felt a tear slide down his cheek. "She speaks like the Psalms," he murmured before LeBlanc silenced him. "Enough," LeBlanc declared. "In the name of God, we command you to depart this house and submit to proper penance." Mercy looked toward Silas. "Husband, must I obey?" Silas rose slowly. "My wife obeys no man." The elder clergyman lifted his holy water and flung a handful toward her. It struck the air before touching skin and vanished in a faint hiss like salt in flame. All three priests stumbled backward. Mercy remained motionless, eyes half closed, whispering something the record later described as not language, but tone. LeBlanc fell ill for months after, plagued by dreams of women weeping in cane fields. He resigned the following year and retired to a monastery in Quebec, never speaking of Meriton again. By midsummer, sickness descended upon the remaining workers. Not lethal, just relentless. Fainting fits, spontaneous nosebleeds, laughter that ended in sobs. They swore the air near the house shimmered like heat, even at night. In desperation, one of the younger hands, Elias, crept up to the veranda after midnight carrying a small bundle, a chicken tied in string and a knife wrapped in burlap. Louvenia had once taught him old warding rites. He thought to repeat them. Through a cracked shutter, he spied Mercy standing before the mirror, her reflection moving a fraction out of rhythm with her body. As she brushed her hair, the mirror image smiled first, lips parting an instant before hers did. Elias screamed, dropping the knife. Within the hour, he was gone. The next morning, they found feathers spread across the path to the quarters, perfectly arranged as though by a meticulous hand. Beneath them lay the handle of his knife, blade missing. Silas forbade discussion of it. "Accidents breed folly," he said, but he could not hide the tremor in his voice. By autumn, the plantation's wealth had withered. Buyers refused Meriton cane, claiming the syrup tasted of iron. Silas sold land parcels to pay his debts, each sale tightening the noose around his sanity. The household ledger from that season still survives, its entries degenerating into fragments. September 10th, debtors gone north. October 3, night breeze smells of copper. November 1st, she sleeps sound yet eyes open. That last line marks the eve the final tragedy began. A journalist from the Picayune, one Henry Barlow, arrived claiming to write on strange disturbances of the river parishes. A city man with skeptical wit, he expected rural superstition, not evidence. Mercy greeted him with charm disarming as sunlight. She even permitted interviews with remaining staff. Confident truth, her truth, would outshine rumor. Barlow's notes, recovered after his death, are some of the only first-hand accounts. He wrote, "Her speech lacks affectation, yet every phrase lands where it hurts most, as though she's heard your thoughts in rehearsal. She questions rather than defends. A better politician than any senator I've met." He spent 3 nights at the plantation, cataloging facts. Each evening he grew more unsettled. On the second night, he heard faint hammering from under the floorboards, though the house slept. On the third, Silas confessed his mind might be failing. "I see Eleanor in mirrors," he admitted. "Sometimes she smiles, sometimes she frowns. Mercy says I conjure guilt." But guilt was a smaller ghost. Barlow wrote the next line, almost trembling. "He introduced me to her little room. Merely a trunk, sewing table, plain mirror. Yet when she stood before it, I swear I saw not one reflection but several, like panes stacked through fog." He fled before dawn, promising to publish nothing. His body was discovered weeks later adrift near Plaquemine, lungs full of river silt. On his chest, the mark. To outsiders, coincidence explained everything. Fever, madness, river mishap, all plausible. But inside the parish, superstition curdled into panic. Merchants refused coins stamped with the Meriton crest. Black funerals held at night echoed with a new refrain, half curse, half lament, about the bride who stole the sun. When an anonymous hand nailed a crude sign to the courthouse door reading, "Bury the witch or the land will drown," Sheriff Holt could no longer ignore the public. he gathered 5 men and sailed upriver. They found the plantation deserted except for Silas and Mercy. Servants had fled into the bayou days earlier. Inside, every surface gleamed spotless, yet the air carried the undertone of rot. Silas met them with a detached politeness, inviting inspection. "My wife is indisposed," he said when the sheriff demanded to see her. "The season wears on her nerves." But Holt pushed past. In the upstairs corridor, the group found Mercy standing before an open window, wind lifting her gown like the sail of a gentle storm. She turned slowly. "You came to take me?" she asked. "We came for answers," the sheriff said. "Answers?" Her smile cut through the stale air. "Men never survive those." One of the deputies raised his pistol. "Enough riddles!" Silas cried out, but before he could intervene, the deputy screamed. The gun dropped, barrel blister hot, though unfired. Across his palm bloomed a perfect red imprint, shaped like feminine fingers. "Out!" Holt ordered, stumbling backward. "This place is poison." They left that night, refusing to write any report. The sheriff drank himself to death within a year. After that visit, Silas stopped appearing in town altogether. Letters sent to him were returned sealed with wax, bearing only the impression of a hand, 5 slender fingers pressed in crimson. Rumors multiplied until reality itself buckled beneath them. Some said Mercy died that winter, buried secretly near the rose garden. Others swore she hadn't aged, that her silhouette still glided along the balcony when the fog rolled from the river. The only verifiable event came from a purchase record dated January 1854. Silas bought 20 yards of black velvet and enough candles to light a cathedral. No deliveries followed ever again. A year later, plantation brokers surveying the foreclosed property found the big house locked from within. Breaking a window, they entered. The rooms were pristine, dustless. In the upstairs bedroom, 2 chairs faced each other by the fireplace. Candles melted to stubs on the floor in a perfect circle. On one chair sat Silas, hands folded, eyes open to nothing. No wound, no rot, just stillness. Outside the circle lay a woman's dress folded neatly with a locket placed atop it. Inside the locket, ashes and the lingering note of magnolia. The coroner declared natural causes. The parish called it deliverance. But those who worked that soil after spoke of nights when cane blades bent as though pressed by invisible palms, and the wind carried an echo of laughter too human to be breeze. The tale reached the newspapers in fragments, colored by prejudice and awe. Mysterious fate of a Louisiana planter, house left in startling order, master dead at his post. The more respectable journals avoided mentioning Mercy by name, referring instead to a certain woman, mixed race, of remarkable persuasiveness. The story became a mirror for every anxiety of the age, of race, of gender, of faith shaken by progress. Some saw moral punishment for a nation's sin. Others whispered of witchcraft bordering on possession. Either way, the Meriton tragedy invited more questions than it buried. What do you think? Guilty souls cursed by God, or victims of madness born from a world already sick at its core? Tell us below. Your theories matter here. When investigators from Baton Rouge reopened the Meriton files in 1871, barely 6 years after the war ended, they expected to encounter only dust and myth. Instead, they uncovered a sealed crate labeled Household Effects, Property of S. Meriton, Deceased. Inside, the locket, a sheaf of half-burned letters, and one intact diary written in Mercy's own hand. The ink had bled from humidity, but enough survived to form sentences sharp as thorns. What is ownership but the wish to keep what cannot be kept? They bought my body. I bought their peace. I kept account. The handwriting itself changed as pages continued, becoming slanted, forceful, almost carved, and one passage roiled historians for generations. The river will take the unjust, but the river is never full. When the master sleeps, I whisper to the current, "Be patient, I am coming." For the parish, it wasn't revelation of witchcraft that shocked. It was the cool recording of arithmetic in sorrow's veil. Mercy had chronicled each death as though marking a ledger of transgressions balanced. The fever victims were listed not by name but by trespass. One who struck without cause, one who laughed at prayer, one who spoke the word sold. Remarkably, she never implicated Silas outright, but her final entries trembled with foreboding, the calm disintegrating into urgency. He asks what voice I answer. I tell him the same that carried his wife away. He will not understand that grief itself is a mouth. It calls, and I have learned to speak its language. To piece together that final night, historians depended on two sources: the diary's last pages and the oral memory of a freedman named Isaac, one of the few who lingered on the property into Reconstruction. Decades later, in an interview published by the New Orleans Crescent, Isaac described what he witnessed before fleeing for good. "It was stormin' again, same as the night master gone. Wind pushed the river clean over its banks. I was fixin' shutters when I hear singin'. Low, too low for any woman I know. More like the ground was hummin'. Then I see light upstairs, heavy yellow, swingin' like flame underwater." He said he approached the window and saw two figures, Mercy kneeling before a circle of candles, Silas standing within it, his face red from reflection. "She talkin' steady, words not English, not none I heard in church nor quarters. He holdin' her hands, starin' so hard his eyes white, and wind blow all round, but candles don't move. Then, like snap of a whip, light out, sound go, everything still, only smell, magnolia and rain. I run then. I ain't look back." For years, locals dismissed Isaac's testimony as superstition, a freedman's embellishment to please reporters. But when scholars compared his account with the diary's last paragraph, fear turned to fascination. "Tonight the world must decide who owns whom," Mercy wrote. "If my silence ends him, let it be known I prayed for gentleness. But the river cares little for wishing." The next page was blank, except for one pressed magnolia petal, dried and gray. Speculation flourished. Some said she poisoned Silas in ritual communion. Others swore it was his final submission, a willing surrender to her will, a reversed crucifixion. The diary hinted both trivial and cosmic motives. There was longing on every line, but not the sweet sort. It read like a covenant between vengeance and desire. The language blurred theology with mathematics. If a soul strikes twice, it must be struck twice. Not I who decree it. The weight of the world demands symmetry. That symmetry seemed to echo through history itself, an enslaved woman mastering the master, rewriting property into deliverance. For post-war readers, Mercy became myth, half avenger, half victim. Yet, beneath myth, documentary fragments whispered of something still less human and more inexorable. A single field notebook recovered from Silas's desk contained a confession never published in his lifetime. "There are two Mercies, the one I married, and the one that looks out through her eyes at night. The latter does not blink. When she lays a hand upon me, I feel the pulse of the ground beneath her feet, as though the land itself borrowed her skin. It is comfort and sentence." That almost sounded like poetry, until one noticed the tear stains warping ink into crescent shapes. Silas, for all his pride, seemed terrified of his own salvation. Visiting scholars who later stood amid the plantation ruin, cypress roots invading parlors where once orchestras played, often reported physical nausea, uncontrollable trembling. Some blamed mold toxins. Others whispered that the air still held something aware. Their testimonies, though centuries removed, align uncannily. The smell of magnolia sounds faint as humming, a feeling of being watched from below. One journalist of the 1880s, writing under the pseudonym A. Traveler, dared to spend a night there for a Halloween column. His printed words read like delirium. At midnight, the boards beneath my bed began to breathe. Not creak, breathe, as though lungs below exhaled once every few seconds. When I opened my eyes, every picture frame hung upside down. I fled into the hallway where moonlight painted the dust, and there, at the stair, a woman stood outlined in silver, her face serene, beautiful, and utterly pitiless. She raised her hand in greeting or judgment, and all doors opened at once as though to usher me out. I obeyed. The traveler left Louisiana immediately afterward. He continued to send anonymous letters to the Times-Democrat, pleading that the house be burned, lest it remember too clearly. But burning would not cleanse memory. The ruins resisted decay unnaturally, wood refusing to rot, paint refusing to peel even under swamp moisture. Engineers puzzled, priests recoiled. In 1902, an Episcopal mission built a chapel on neighboring land to consecrate the area. Yet during the first Mass, strange things occurred. Wine curdled, and each candle guttered precisely at the credo. Congregants later refused to enter again. By then, locals had forged their own scripture around Mercy's legend. Children were warned, speak untrue, and Mercy will count you. Lovers carved her initials into trees for luck, misunderstanding utterly the darkness her name carried. Still the question grew. What truly happened in that candlelit bedroom before dawn? The last surviving relic, her locket, offered a single new clue. In 1931, chemists at Louisiana State University tested the residue within. Beneath trace ash, they found granules not of bone but of powdered sugar mixed with iron oxide. Sugar and blood, fused exactly as rumors claimed the fields had bled. The scientists could only call it unidentifiable organic matter. In that mixture, historians saw her creed made matter, sweetness and pain indistinguishable, labor and death transmuted into a single communion. Yet the story's deepest horror did not reside in spectral murmurs or chemical curiosities. It lay in how willingly every participant, master, priest, journalist, scholar, entered the circle she drew. They all approached her thinking to expose illusion, only to find themselves rewritten inside it. Consider Father LeBlanc's later monastic writings, unpublished until the 1940s. One fragment seems addressed directly to her ghost. If you were demon, then hell is only justice delayed. But if you were angel, then God himself must apologize to every field you walked. I still smell the river in prayer. He lived another 30 years, repeating that single-sense name, Magnolia, Magnolia, until the monks ceased correcting him. Modern historians, attempting to disentangle myth from human cruelty, interpret Mercy's actions through psychology. They call it trauma curated into power, a woman taught to read suffering as her language, using seduction not as vice, but vocabulary. But folklore makes no such allowances. In oral retellings, she rises each generation as a mirror of America's nightmares. The personified conscience of slavery, or the first lady of the swamp who judges unjust masters. Each decade shapes her differently, yet one detail persists: the handprint mark. Acts of violence or misfortune near the old parish sometimes bear bruises arranged just so. When journalist Nell Avery visited for a centennial feature, she sneered at superstition, until she cut her palm picking wild cane, and the wound darkened to a violet hand shape. She wrote no more articles. Thus, Mercy remains half erased, beloved and dreaded, her locket's confession bound to time like a patient curse. I did not mean to love them all. Who were them? The lovers, the overseers, the priests, or the entire order that chained her kind beneath law and called it grace? Perhaps she loved, and in loving, consumed everything capable of sinning against her. If we imagine that final night not as haunting but as reckoning, the image clarifies. Silas kneels within the candle circle, exhausted, pleading for absolution. Mercy answers not with cruelty, but synthesis. She presses her palm to his chest, not to kill, but to join. Their heartbeats sink until silence replaces rhythm. The mark left behind is unity, made visible. To outsiders, a bruise. To her, completion. Then she steps through the open window into the thunderstorm, letting wind and rain erase her body until only scent remains. The river, patient, receives its due. And when dawn broke over Meriton, no sign of struggle lingered. Only two chairs facing one another, candles extinguished by their own wax tears. If you stood in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer. When Reconstruction's bureaucrats finally cataloged the property in the 1870s, they treated the Meriton tragedy as mere estate business. The federal assessors itemized everything: furniture, livestock, fencing, careful not to mention rumor. Yet they still wrote cryptically in the margin of one report, "Whole place uneasy. Hands refuse quarters after sunset." From there, the story began its second life, not of flesh, but of voice. For the freed families scattered across Iberville, Mercy Elkins became a kind of code. Old women invoked her name softly when plantation owners tried to reclaim indentures. "Don't wake Mercy," they warned, meaning, remember what happens when the owned bite back. Even newspapers, bound by gentility, couldn't quite hush fascination. The Times-Picayune serialized a dramatized account called The Hand Upon the Heart in 1889, changing all names but keeping the setting. Readers devoured it. Ministers from pulpits thundered against fiction that excused sin, but congregations secretly bought copies from newsboys after service anyway. By the turn of the century, dime novels in New York and Boston turned the manipulative slave into Gothic heroines wielding mesmerist powers. Northern audiences thrilled at horrors safely remote, drawing a curtain of entertainment over the real brutality once routine in the South. It was easier to believe a single sorceress had cursed a plantation than to admit thousands of ordinary men and women built their comfort on others' misery. The actual site decayed in slow stages. In 1912, a lumber syndicate bought the land, intending to raise the house. The work camp lasted only 4 days. On the 5th, a laborer was found dead beside his saw, heart burst, skin marked faintly like a handprint. The syndicate abandoned the effort. The remains of the house were left to vines and legend. During the Depression, WPA folklorists traveled parish to parish collecting tales. From an elderly blacksmith, they wrote down, "Miss Mercy didn't die. She married the ground. That's why cane grows sweet even in poisoned dirt." In those brief sentences, myth condensed into something like justice, an old man's quiet insistence that some balance, somewhere, had been restored. Every few decades, the story resurfaced, renewed by circumstance. In the 1950s, when Southern writers turned Gothic inward to pry open buried guilt, Meriton Bride reappeared as symbol of a region haunted by its own gentility. In the 1960s, amid marches for civil rights, local activists invoked her as a haunting memory of what silenced voices might yet do if driven too far. A student pamphlet issued at Baton Rouge read, "She whispered once, 'Do not make her speak again.' Even the church could not fully let go. Parish priests continued sprinkling holy water along the levee each All Souls' Day, citing tradition. The river, they insisted, needed appeasement. By the late 20th century, the plantation's shell had become a heritage site. Tour brochures softened everything: pretty architecture, Spanish moss, tragic romance. Guides barely mentioned Mercy except as interesting folklore. Tourists walked those halls eating pralines, never noticing the faint sweetness mingled with dust might be older than sugar itself. But, occasionally, humanity pierced the packaging. In 1983, a maintenance worker refused to finish his job sealing the floorboards in the kitchen. He told a reporter, "Smelled something pure, like flowers where nobody planted none. Felt somebody watching courteous-like, just making sure I didn't lie about what I seen." The smell documented in so many testimonies still rose from boards charred by time. Magnolia, gentle and accusatory. Historians argue over facts, yet what endures in each retelling is uneasy awe. Mercy Elkins no longer fits tidy morals. She is not villain, not saint, not ghost. She is memory given backbone, striding out of record-keeping into permanent rumor. Her legend lingers because it carries contradictions the nation still mouths but never swallows. Beauty masking horror, ownership disguising need. Standing amid the ruins today, you hear only cicadas. But if you wait through twilight, you may catch the hush between their songs. A dense pause heavy with listening. Locals say that's the house breathing. Same phrase Silas once used when he paced those halls. But no matter the century, one truth remains. Stories born of suffering do not die. They adapt, shedding shape but not intention. First they crawl through rumor, then rise through art, until they slip finally into policy and protest. The voice changes. The warning endures. If you drive west from Baton Rouge and stop near the bend where the levee once broke, the air grows oddly sweet. Magnolia trees no longer bloom there, yet the fragrance persists. Beneath that scent, buried deep in silt, lie pieces of brickwork and foundation, the bones of a house that refused to forget itself. Farmers say cane still sprouts thicker right above it. Some whisper that's Mercy feeding her garden. Others think it's only minerals stirred by floodwater. Either definition holds weight. Both make the living shiver. Nothing ever truly ends in the South, least of all the past. It recites itself differently each season, like a hymn missing its last verse. And somewhere amid rustling stalks, if the wind aligns just right, a woman's voice may thread through the dark, calm and unforgiving, murmuring her final line over and over. I did not mean to love them all. So what do you believe now that the dust has settled over the Meriton ruins? Was Mercy Elkins a calculating sinner, twisting human weakness into a private empire of vengeance? Or was she an echo of the land itself, turning justice inside out until the guilty named it witchcraft? Perhaps her story endures because it invites no comfort. America's old houses whisper not of ghosts, but of debts unpaid, voices that rise when silence grows too proud. Some nights, river fog drifts over those fields, soft and gray as breath, and locals swear they see light flicker where the balcony once stood. They say it's not haunting at all, simply history rehearsing itself for the few who listen. So, what's your truth? Was this a love corrupted, or a reckoning disguised as romance? Write your theory in the comments. If you want us to keep digging into America's darkest history, like this video and subscribe for next week's story.